Have you ever met a person who's so quiet they practically fade into the background? The one who seems to be just there. You don't notice them until one day they make a move, and everything you thought you knew falls apart. This is a story about how one silent woman brought an entire corporation to its knees with a single, perfectly timed act of revenge. Her name was Barbara. A facilities manager once came across Barbara in the server room, not sobbing, just silently weeping while she worked on calibrating a voltage map. Wiping her face with an old rag, she mumbled, "It's just the dust," explaining that the HVAC had been off all week. Then she immediately returned to fixing a problem someone else had created. That was 6 years ago. She never cried on the job again, not when her last 3 superiors were let go for financial mismanagement. Not when her team was downsized from 15 to 5. Not even when the new ERP system accidentally deleted 3 months of compliance logs, forcing her to reconstruct everything from memory over a bourbon and 2 Diet Cokes. Barbara Monroe was the kind of person you don't notice until you're on fire, and she's the one calmly walking toward you with a fire extinguisher. In her mid-50s, she had hair like a steel wool scouring pad and wore the same navy blue cardigan so often it might as well have been a part of her ID badge. She rarely spoke in meetings. She didn't need to, because when the executives left the room to go high-five over synergy charts, Barbara was the one left with the actual launch dates, the legal deadlines, and the passwords they always forgot to write down. Before we continue, if you've stayed this long and haven't already subscribed or liked this video, now is the time to do it. The team behind these videos looks at the numbers and frankly, they get a little dejected when they don't see those engagement metrics. So, if you enjoy hearing stories about how the quiet ones can completely upend an entire boardroom with a single email, please hit that like button. It means so much to the people who put these narratives together. Now back to Barbara. She wasn't about flesh, she was all about function. If the company were a skeleton, Barbara would be the bone marrow. She had survived 4 departmental restructurings, 2 corporate mergers, and a CFO embezzlement scandal that everyone preferred to forget. She remained quiet through it all, sipping her lukewarm coffee from a chipped World's Ok's engineer mug and observing the chaos swirl around her like a storm that couldn't quite touch her. The new $100 million flagship facility, which everyone hailed as a generational leap in energy operations, was supposed to be her crowning achievement. It was her blueprint, her ductwork designs, her compliance filings, and her whispered phone call to a contact at the utility company that made the grid schedule bend around their construction delays like a yoga instructor on Red Bull. She had a spreadsheet that could make a grown man weep. The wiring diagrams alone had more color coding than a box of Crayola crayons possessed by the ghost of Steve Jobs, but no one gave her a plaque or a bonus. Instead, they gave her more work. Barbara didn't complain. She simply tightened her shoelaces and walked onto the factory floor, clipboard in hand, checking off supply chain corrections and reminding the interns again not to stack HVAC manuals on top of the emergency shut-off switch. She was still logging 18-hour days 2 weeks before launch, coordinating between unions, vendors, and whatever genius in procurement had ordered 50,000 serrated pipes when they only needed 5,000. That was Barbara, the living firewall between almost ready and what the hell just exploded. Around day T-12, a shadow slithered into the building wearing a suit that cost more than Barbara's first car. Brent Whitaker, the newly appointed COO, swaggered in with teeth that were a little too white and confidence that was entirely unearned. The news spread quickly. He was a streamliner, a fixer, a guy who had made a name for himself by gutting old systems and replacing institutional inertia with agile optimization. In executive jargon, that meant he was about to fire everyone who knew where the real kill switches were. Barbara watched him work the floor like he owned it, holding meetings without inviting the people who actually managed the plant, asking interns for their insider takes on workflow, and referring to Barbara as ma'am, as if she were a receptionist. He started using phrases like dead weight and legacy operations. She wasn't insulted, she was intrigued. Because the thing about Barbara was that she always made backups, digital, paper, USB drives. When Brent started poking around in the compliance logs and asking who handled the utility integration, Barbara didn't say a single word. She simply updated her spreadsheet, subtly revised a few file permissions, and went home that evening with a faint smirk on her lips like someone who knows a train is coming but has already stepped off the tracks. She had seen men like him before, men who thought the job was about the software, the launch event, and the camera crews. But Barbara knew the job was about the grid, the wires, and the signature on the energy authorization document that allowed the entire building to function. And what Brent didn't know, because he never bothered to ask, was that there was only one name on that document: hers. Brent Whitaker's presence was like a cheap cologne, loud, overly confident, and difficult to get rid of. On day one, he parked in the executive spot marked Visitor, strutted through the lobby with an unused Bluetooth headset, and greeted the receptionist with, "Let's get this place humming again." Humming? This wasn't a spa. This was a 480,000 square foot industrial behemoth with a heartbeat of turbines and ducting coils. And Barbara had been the one keeping it alive through 3 budget cuts and a 5-month copper shortage. He came from the world of consulting, which is corporate slang for, he's never actually built a damn thing. He's just good at making PowerPoint slides. Within 48 hours, Brent began carving up organizational charts like a child with his first pair of safety scissors. He fired 3 managers by noon on Thursday and replaced them with interim strategic advisors who looked like they had just walked off the set of a deodorant commercial. That week, no one over 40 received a meeting invitation. Barbara was informed that her calendar access had been temporarily restricted due to a workflow reorganization. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Barbara had her own system, a dusty old ThinkPad no one else dared to touch, printed spreadsheets, authorization logs signed in blue ink, and a folder on her desk labeled Plant Launch. No Idiot's Edition. In it was every approval chain, every vendor contact, every tiny detail that connected their Frankenstein plant to the regional grid. He never once asked her what she did. Instead, he drifted through meetings with a whiteboard and a big dream, talking about modernizing culture and eliminating single points of failure. The irony was that he was rapidly becoming the biggest single point of failure the company had seen since the Great Forklift Reversal of 2014. At one staff meeting, Barbara was sitting in the back, as she always did, taking notes with a pen while Brent paced in front of a screen filled with business buzzwords. He gestured at a pie chart labeled Legacy Inefficiencies and declared, "This represents everything that's holding us back." Then he pointed directly at Barbara and said, "Like our old permitting workflows, why are we still using physical signatures in 2025? There was a moment of silence. Someone coughed. Barbara blinked once and continued writing. She didn't bother to respond. Why explain things to a man who believes an energy compliance protocol is just a form you can digitize with DocuSign? She knew what he was. Brent wasn't just trying to make changes. He wanted a narrative. A hero's journey, a dramatic tale he could sell to the board about disrupting legacy thinking and leaning into agile execution. That meant he needed a villain. And Barbara, with her hard copies, chain of custody folders, and antiquated fax machine, was the perfect choice. He started by removing her from key conference calls. Then her security badge stopped working on certain doors. Finally, she was removed from the plant launch preparation committee to reduce redundancy. When she showed up at a safety inspection with her clipboard, Brent greeted her with a smile so fake it could have been 3D printed. "We're going in a new direction, Barb," he said. "It's time to let some fresh eyes take over." Barbara just looked at him, offering no reply. But later that day, she printed out a complete list of all her current responsibilities just for her own records. Then she went home, opened her dusty fireproof safe, and added a fresh USB drive labeled Final PR Relaunch Package Do Not Touch. Barbara could smell the approaching storm. Brent thought he was making the ship more efficient. What he was actually doing was poking holes in the hull while standing on the deck, shouting about innovation, and Barbara wasn't about to hand him the repair kit. The interns were the first to notice. Suddenly, there were whispers. What does Barbara actually do? Isn't she like the plant historian or something? Brent encouraged it, calling her our institutional memory, as if it were an insult. In one meeting, someone suggested automating the compliance chain. Brent clapped and said, "Exactly. No offense, Barbara, but the future doesn't live in a binder." She didn't respond. She just turned a page in her binder and scribbled a note. "Remove his name from everything that matters." It was petty to be sure, but Barbara had spent 27 years being the most responsible person in the room. At a certain point, even the most responsible person gets tired of babysitting. Because Brent hadn't just underestimated her. He had no idea what she possessed, what she had built. And by the time he figured it out, the only thing fresh about his leadership was going to be how completely screwed he was. Barbara knew the final blow was coming when Brent started using words like synergy in sentences that involve wiring schematics. He had never touched a breaker box in his life, but there he was, lecturing the operations team about streamlining energy compliance sign-offs, as if the regional utility company would just nod along and say, "Sure, skip the protocol." Brent said it's fine. It happened on a Tuesday. They were in conference room B, the big one with the broken speaker and the flickering light that no one ever bothered to fix because, well, Barbara was the only one who knew the facility's request login. Brent stood at the head of the table, whiteboard marker in hand, as if he were about to solve cold fusion with a simple flowchart. "Let's discuss the plant's final sign-off," he said, turning toward Barbara. "You're saying the utility company requires a hard copy authorization from the designated compliance officer. Can't we just update it in the vendor portal?" Barbara, as calm as you please, opened her binder to a specific section. Under Resolution 12A, subsection. Brent cut her off mid-sentence with a condescending smirk. "Barbara, please, you have a binder for everything, but this isn't 1998, sweetheart." A slow hush fell over the room. Even Greg from logistics, who once audibly farted during an OSHA briefing and didn't notice, stopped chewing his gum. Brent turned to the rest of the team and chuckled. "I mean, come on, everyone. Look, Barbara's been here a long time. We appreciate her historical perspective, but let's be real. She's not essential. She's legacy ballast." Legacy ballast? The words hung in the air like a stain. Barbara didn't blink, didn't flinch. She simply closed her binder, capped her pen, and stood up, as if someone had just offered her a dessert she didn't want. Brent gave a half shrug and added, "HR will walk you through the exit process. No hard feelings." She looked at him long and slow, then turned to the rest of the ops team, made eye contact with absolutely no one, and walked out. Security met her at her cubicle with a cardboard box and a badge deactivation slip. "We'll need your fob and ID," the guard said, looking nervous as if he expected her to throw a chair. Barbara handed both over, then picked up her coffee mug, the one that said "Still plays with power tools," and gently placed it into the box. Next to it, she put a stapler, a backup phone charger, 2 USB drives, and a small laminated card that read, "Utility Contact Protocol, Monroe, access only." She paused just long enough for the guard to glance at it, then tucked it under the mug, but she didn't leave angry. Barbara didn't scream or slam drawers. She didn't take a last dramatic look around the office. Instead, she walked directly to the IT desk, smiled politely, and requested a final login on her terminal. "Just need to send my transition notes," she said. The IT guy nodded and tapped his badge. Barbara sat down, typed for exactly 11 minutes, and sent one email with CCs to Brent, legal operations, and 2 people no one else in that building even knew existed. The subject line was, "Final System Transfer Summary, Plant 6 Pre-Launch." The email was a masterpiece. Every checklist, every compliance step, every file path for the encrypted launch scripts, all clear, concise, and impeccably documented, except for one thing. The primary utility compliance contact field was left conspicuously blank. No explanation, no snark, just a quiet, gaping hole where her name should have been. She logged out, closed the laptop lid, and left her box by the security desk. "Someone from facilities will need to approve my off-boarding inventory," she told the guard, "though I imagine that'll be tricky since I was facilities." Then she walked out of that building as if it owed her nothing, and in a way, it didn't. Not anymore. Because Barbara had spent her entire career making sure the right switches got flipped at the right time. This time, she simply left one of them off. Launch day was supposed to be a spectacle, the kind of event that gets featured on the company website and paraded at investor conferences like a newborn covered in branding slogans. There were balloons, branded pastries, and the CEO in one of those expensive, shiny suits that made him look like a ventriloquist's dummy married to a golf club. Brent looked even worse. He wore a navy tailored jacket with no tie and enough cologne to be classified as a biohazard. There was a drone pilot, a legitimate drone pilot, hired to get a sweeping aerial shot of the moment they flipped the metaphorical switch. A local news crew was on standby. Some poor intern had been tasked with live tweeting the event using hashtags like China Next Gen Energy and Chora Bright Future. They had a ribbon. They had gold scissors. They had a podium ready and a microphone prepped for Brent's inevitable TED Talk light monologue about operational synergy meeting sustainable foresight. There was only one tiny problem. Nothing turned on. Literally nothing. The light stayed dark. The HVAC system didn't rumble to life. No turbines spun, no screens flickered on with the flashy startup animation they had paid a contractor 20 grand to create. The main grid console displayed a single, simple message. No primary authorization detected. At first, Brent thought it was a technical glitch. Just reboot the terminal, he muttered, waving at the nearest engineer as if she were a hotel concierge. She tried twice, then called over one of the plant electricians. The electrician typed a few commands, checked a line feed, then furrowed his brow. "This isn't a software issue," he said. "This is on the grid side. We aren't connected." Brent chuckled nervously. "What do you mean we aren't connected? This building has more copper than a penny factory." The electrician just shrugged. "We have the hardware, we don't have the clearance." At that moment, a middle manager sprinted down the hallway like his pants were on fire. "Our operations says the utility company isn't registering our access. They're saying we need a sign-off from someone." "From who?" Brent snapped. The manager, sweating through his dress shirt, held up his phone with the email from the utility company. It was short, brutal, and written entirely in capital letters. "Grid activation requires primary compliance contact authorization. Current contact Barbara Monroe. No alternate listed." Silence. You could have heard a paperclip hit the floor, or Brent's ego cracking like old linoleum. The CEO, who had been mid-conversation with an investor about strategic milestones, turned around. "Is that accurate?" he asked calmly. Brent made a noise that could generously be described as a barked hiccup. "That can't be right. She was Legacy Ballast." "Legacy Ballast?" the CEO repeated, as if he had just discovered a cockroach in his champagne. One of the interns, God bless her, tried to salvage the moment. "Should we delay the ribbon cutting until the lights are on?" They never cut that ribbon. Instead, Brent started pacing, muttering things like, "There should have been a failover, and why wasn't there a redundancy protocol?" Legal was called. HR was called. The contractor who designed the Energy Portal's user interface was called, even though everyone knew this wasn't a UI problem. It was a signature problem, because buried deep in the Energy Compliance Handbook, Section 5, Subsection G, Paragraph 3 was a clause requiring that any activation of a high-capacity industrial grid node be signed off by the designated primary compliance officer of record. And that record still said Barbara Monroe. No one had updated it. Brent never asked who filed the paperwork. Legal assumed operations had done it. Operations assumed Brent had new contacts lined up. HR thought she had been replaced in the system, but Barbara hadn't been replaced because Barbara hadn't left the system. She had just left the building. The drone pilot packed up his gear. The catering staff quietly wheeled their carts back to the van. One of the ribbon-cutting scissors disappeared. Someone said the janitor took them, which felt a little poetic. Investors began tapping their watches. The news crew left to cover a dog rescue 3 blocks away. And Brent? He stood in front of a lifeless building with a fake smile and a real sweat stain growing like a crime scene under his armpits. No one said it out loud yet, but they all knew the plant hadn't failed. Brent had. The emergency board meeting was called within 2 hours of the failed launch, which meant no one had time to polish their excuses or their shoes. The CEO showed up in a golf pullover with murder in his eyes. Half the VPs arrived still holding their bagels. Brent walked in last, pale and sweating, as if he had just been forced to drink his own LinkedIn profile. The lights in the conference room flickered as if in solidarity with the dead plant. The utility company didn't send an email this time. They sent a man. He looked like he had been genetically engineered in a legal lab somewhere in Delaware. He wore a gray suit, had white hair, and possessed zero discernible facial expressions. He didn't shake hands or introduce himself. He just sat down, placed a folder on the glass table, and opened it like a priest preparing for last rites. "We have reviewed the activation failure," he said, his voice smooth and lifeless. "Your grid integration failed due to a lack of a primary contact. As per regulatory protocol, energy delivery at this scale requires authorization from the designated individual on file." He paused, flipping a page. "Your file lists one name, Barbara Monroe." A silence so heavy it could have cracked the floor, tiles fell over the room. The CEO leaned forward. "Are you saying we can't activate the building until she approves it?" The lawyer nodded once. "That is correct. But she's no longer with us," Brent croaked. Her role was eliminated. We assumed the system would." The lawyer didn't even blink. No one updated the designation. Without a signed handoff, the contact cannot be changed. It is a federal requirement. The CEO turned slowly, like a glacier rotating. He looked at Brent. What list is he referring to? Brent's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He glanced at Legal. Legal glanced at HR. HR, to their credit, tried to power through with a confidence built entirely on nothing. We believe there was a clerical delay in the succession of authority. Our system should have updated automatically upon personnel offboarding. The lawyer blinked once. You're confusing corporate protocol with grid compliance regulation. The systems are not connected. There is no automation. The designation is manual, logged, and verified via in-person authentication. That appointment was never revoked. The CEO stood not quickly but slowly, like the heat rising off a burner. He turned to Legal. Did anyone see a revocation? Legal flipped open a binder, scanned, and flipped again. The pages started to snap faster and faster as the color drained from the lawyer's face. We don't have one on file. Brent tried to sit a little taller. Look, she was redundant. We had to trim headcount. This wasn't personal. She was legacy ops. He added, she left quietly. The CEO stared at him. Quietly? Then he turned to the utility lawyer. If we contact Miss Monroe and she authorizes the activation, how long would the delay be? The man didn't smile, but there was something in his eyes as if he were watching a child learn about gravity for the first time. If she signs tonight, less than 24 hours. If she refuses, you'll need to restart the designation process. That involves a site inspection, credential verification, and a full regulatory re-review. 6 to 8 weeks minimum. The board collectively exhaled, not in relief, but in dread. Hackford, that timeline would obliterate their investor rollout, kill their press coverage, and delay downstream contracts tied to the plant going live. They'd lose millions daily. All because one name was still on one list. Barbara Monroe. Someone at the far end of the table whispered, "Did no one check the compliance chain?" Legal coughed. Assumed it was standard. The workflow was supposed to be updated once Brent's team transitioned the launch authority. The CEO didn't even look at Brent this time. He looked at the door. "Someone get me her number!" Brent tried one last time. "This is absurd. We're being held hostage by a name on a form. There has to be a way to override it." The utility lawyer snapped his folder shut. "There is not." Then he stood up. "I'll await the call. Good day." And with that, he walked out. No drama, no flourish, just the cold silence of a system doing exactly what it was built to do, protect itself from people like Brent. The CEO sat back down quiet, focused, and for the first time in years, Barbara Monroe's absence wasn't just felt, it was catastrophic. Barbara was kneading sourdough when the world came crawling back. This wasn't some fanciful metaphor. She was elbow deep in flour, wrist deep in dough, mentally timing her second proof when her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Classical music hummed from a dusty radio in the corner, and outside, her neighbor's dog barked as if auditioning for a security gig it would never land. It was the first proper day off she had enjoyed in 2 decades, and she had chosen to spend it making bread because some people find peace in yoga or hiking. Barbara found hers in gluten. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. She wiped her hands on her apron, picked up the phone, and answered with all the calm confidence of a woman who knew she held the upper hand. "Barbara Monroe." A pause then. "Barbara, this is Daniel from the board." Barbara blinked slowly. "Ah, so not a spam call." His voice was different than usual, lower and more measured, like a man choosing his words very, very carefully. "I understand this is unexpected," he said, "but I'd like to discuss the possibility of your immediate return under revised terms." Barbara turned the stove dial down and leaned against the counter, watching the dough rise as if it had nothing to prove. "I see," she said. It wasn't a question or an offer, just a mirror held up to his desperation. There was another pause, a longer one. "I want to be clear," Daniel continued, "that this isn't a favor. It's a formal request. The board recognizes the oversight and wants to rectify it. Our utility integration has stalled. The entire launch is at risk. You are essential." A tiny smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. Another pause. This one landed like a brick wrapped in velvet. "Yes," he said finally. Barbara didn't gloat. She didn't taunt. She wasn't interested in revenge. She was interested in precision. And Brent had given her the cleanest canvas in corporate history. I'll send over my conditions tonight, she said, calm as a lake before a hurricane. They are non-negotiable. I suggest legal reviews them with a full team. Daniel cleared his throat. I understand. I doubt that, Barbara said. But you will. She hung up. Just like that. No theatrics, no deep sighs, just flour-dusted fingers, a firm swipe on the screen, and a return to her dough. Here's the thing. Barbara had spent her whole life being the contingency plan, the fallback. The person you called when the shiny toys broke and the egos ran out of oxygen. This time, however, she was the crisis, and she was going to treat it with all the seriousness it deserved. Later that evening, she typed the conditions with the same precision she used to engineer thermal shutdown protocols. They were simple, brutal, and unflinching. No fluff, no emotion, just bullet points that read like commandments. She saved the file as Return Terms Final PDF and attached it to an email titled simply Your Move. Then she hit send, poured herself a glass of red wine, went back to her bread, and let them stew on that overnight. The PDF landed like a depth charge in the inboxes of half the executive team. It was only one page, no legal jargon, no fluff, just 3 bullet points written in a cold, surgical tone that would make corporate lawyers both weep and applaud. 1. A 400% raise backdated to the day of her termination. No negotiation, no performance reviews, no bonus tiers or incentivized compensation structures. Just raw, immediate cash as in incompetence tax they had accrued trying to replace her with LinkedIn vapor. 2. A public apology from Brent Whitaker. Not a memo, not a leadership transition post on the company blog. Barbara specified it had to be read aloud by Brent himself in the same conference room where he had dismissed her as Lexi Ballas, in front of the same team that watched her being escorted out with a cardboard box and a badge deactivation slip. 3. Full reinstatement of her authority over all compliance systems, plan access, and utility correspondence with complete autonomy. She would not report under operations or be part of a restructured accountability pod. Barbara would have full control of her domain again, as it should have always been. The CEO read it twice, sat back and exhaled through his nose like a man about to make a deal with the devil, only to realize the devil had better references. Can we even justify a 400% raise? HR muttered. Daniel from the board replied without looking up. Do you want the lights on? Pay the power bill. Legal skimmed the second clause and frowned. Brent will fight this. Then Brent can take it up with our investors, the CEO said flatly. Or the press, or whoever else wants to hear why our multi-million-dollar flagship facility still doesn't have grid access. Brent was summoned. He arrived late, as usual, wearing his tailored crisis suit and an expression that rapidly toggled between indignation and sheer panic. When they showed him the terms, he laughed. He actually laughed. You've got to be kidding. You can't be serious. A public apology. She's holding the company hostage. The CEO didn't laugh back. Barbara isn't holding us hostage, Brent. You handed her the keys and then fired her. She's being vindictive. No. Legal cut in, snapping a binder shut. She's being precise. You'd know the difference if you'd ever read a protocol that wasn't on a PowerPoint slide. Brent looked around the room, searching for someone, anyone to back him up. But the mood had shifted. His charisma had curdled. He wasn't the savior anymore, he was the glitch. I'm not doing it, he said, crossing his arms. The CEO didn't argue. He just opened his laptop and tapped a few keys. Okay. Brent blinked. What? What is that? Draft resignation. Effective immediately. Brent's face dropped into a full shade of pale. Wait, you're firing me? Not if you apologize. Brent just stared, then whispered, This is insane. No, the CEO said with the tired certainty of a man who eats 3 antacids before breakfast every day for a month. What was insane was trusting you to lead this launch. Brent didn't speak for a long time, and when he finally did, it wasn't a protest. It was to ask when the meeting was scheduled. By nightfall, Barbara's reply hit their inbox. Terms acknowledged. See you at the reading. No exclamation point. No smiley face. Just the clean, cold punctuation of someone who had already won. The conference room hadn't been this full since the pre-COVID holiday party when someone spiked the cider and Carl from accounting tried to moonwalk into the copier. Every division was there. Operations, compliance, HR, even facilities, who usually avoided anything that smelled of suits and guilt. Laptops were closed, phones were silent, and eyes were focused forward because word had gotten out. Barbara was returning, and Brent was going to read her apology himself. Brent stood at the front of the room, his face flushed, his jaw tight, and his suit crisp enough to cut glass. In his trembling hands, he held a single sheet of paper that seemed to know what was coming. The CEO sat nearby, arms folded, watching. Legal was in the back, clipboard in hand. The air smelled faintly of desperation and too much coffee. Brent cleared his throat. Then again, "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice thinner than usual. "I have a prepared statement on behalf of leadership." He looked up. No one nodded. No one smiled. So he began to read. "On behalf of executive leadership, I acknowledge that the recent removal of Barbara Monroe was a decision made in error. Miss Monroe's role in the development, compliance, and operational readiness of Plant 6 was not only significant, it was foundational." The word foundational landed like a stone in a quiet pond. Brent swallowed. "We regret the oversight and recognize that her departure caused direct and avoidable delays to our flagship launch. As such, effective immediately, Barbara Monroe is reinstated to her previous position with expanded authority over all plant compliance systems and utility relations." Another pause. His fingers tightened around the paper. "And I offer a personal apology to Miss Monroe. My previous statements referring to her as legacy ballast were inappropriate, unprofessional, and categorically wrong. Miss Monroe is, and always has been, essential." His voice cracked on the last word. A few people glanced at each other, not smirking or gloating, just quietly registering the shift in the room's gravity. Brent looked up, and there she was, Barbara Monroe. Same steel-gray cardigan, same practical shoes, a clipboard tucked under one arm like a weapon of mass documentation. She didn't smile, she didn't speak. She just walked up the aisle, slow and steady, and stopped in front of him. He held out her badge with two hands. As if it were a ceremonial sword, she took it without a word, turned, and the room, the entire room, applauded. Not in a riotous or theatrical way, but with steady, relentless clapping, the kind of applause you give not because you love someone, but because you respect what they have just done. Because Barbara didn't scream when they cut her loose. She didn't beg, didn't gossip, and didn't fire off a scathing LinkedIn post about toxic cultures or new beginnings. She waited, then completely upended the entire company with one blank field in a single form that no one had bothered to check. Now she was back, not as a symbol, but as a reminder. Brent stepped aside quietly, looking a little smaller than when he arrived. And Barbara, she turned toward the team, nodded once, and said only one thing before walking out of the room. "Let's turn the damn thing on." The control room felt like the inside of a jet engine holding its breath. Rows of polished monitors blinked in idle blues and muted grays, each one awaiting a signal. The engineer stood back. The IT staff stood still. Even the janitor had wandered in and leaned against the wall with his mop, as if he didn't want to miss the grand finale. At the center console, Barbara stood alone. No ceremony, no ribbon, no photo op. Just her. One key and one terminal. She pulled the chain from around her neck and removed a brass utility fob, one of the last physical authorizations left in a world choking on digital proxies. She slotted it into the console, clicked once, then typed 4 commands, each line clinical and final. The monitors blinked, then shifted. Grid status, initializing. Grid status, syncing. Grid status, authorization verified. Then, with a low hum that built into a deep mechanical purr, the building awoke. Lights exploded to life like a sunrise after a long night. The overhead vents roared. Vents opened with hisses of pressure equalizing across 3 wings of the plant. Panels lit up in full schematic view, showing flow meters, temperature gauges, and voltage arcs. Somewhere in the distance, a substation kicked on, and turbines rumbled like the planet had rolled over and cracked its back. Then the final screen read, "Grid status live." The applause didn't start immediately. It didn't need to. The hum of life was louder. Barbara stepped back from the console, just a half step, just enough to let the moment settle into the bones of every person watching. The CEO, standing in the back, clapped once, then again, slow and deliberate. Everyone else followed, unsure whether they were celebrating the launch, the recovery, or just the sheer fact that this woman had walked them through hell and flipped the lights back on without breaking a sweat. And then, because the universe always loves one final joke, Brent tried to speak. He moved toward her cautiously, still wearing the same smirk, though it had lost all its teeth. "Barbara, I just want to say..." She turned, her eyes calm and flat with no anger and no heat, just a scalpel made of words. "Essential implies leverage," she said. "You understand that now?" He opened his mouth, but she was already walking away, not storming off, not grandstanding, just leaving. Her badge was on her belt and her clipboard was tucked under her arm. The hum of the living building behind her was like a choir of machines singing her name, and she didn't look back because she didn't have to. Everyone else would. Thanks for joining the fun, you corporate survival. Subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge and switch-flipping drama.